Here's where I begin. First, the world needs us to be heroes. Or, if not heroes, powerful, interesting, creative moral actors. Second, if Judaism is to be worth engaging in, if it's to be worth preserving for reasons other than nostalgia or amusement, it's got to be part of that activity. And third, that means that Jewish education should have as at least one of its goals providing students with the means, the tools, the skills, the dispositions to be engaged in that work. And so armed with that, I went to my work, which is teaching. And because I'm a teacher of text, I knew what I had to do. And that was find the Jewish values in the text and give them to my students. Well, if you've ever been part of that exercise on either side of the lectern, you know what that involves. You take a rule, a principle, an idea from the tradition, and then find a way of applying it to a contemporary situation. And I discovered that my students could do that. And so I felt great. Here I was, giving my students good Jewish values. I was helping to raise the next generation of heroes, of mensches. And then I realized something, that as good as the students were at parsing the text and applying those principles, they didn't actually change the way they were. Not with each other, not with me or other teachers, not in the world at large. And I thought about it and I realized that wasn't so surprising. Because what do we know? We know that what students learn is what they practice. And what have they been practicing? They've been practicing the skill of applying general principles to specific cases. And I'm here to tell you that that is a morally neutral activity. Because when you think about it, there's not much difference in the cognitive task of applying a rule about the marketplace to the contemporary street than there is in applying a rule about fashion to the contemporary closet. I had been asking my students to think about ethics, but there is a difference between thinking about ethics and thinking ethically. Well, what does it mean to think ethically? What does it mean to bring that mindset to the world? It means, I think, to experience the world with an open, nuanced, sensitive vision. And that can be manifest in a couple of ways. One is called empathy. And here I don't mean empathy as love or as caring or as support. Empathy is the work of looking at an other and trying to understand the internal life of someone who's different. Why are they speaking in this way? Why are they acting in this way? That's empathy. But there's also a broader way of looking at the world, of looking at the landscape and trying to identify the various moments that are pregnant with moral meaning. Looking at other people who might be involved, looking at interactions, seeing how events and activities might ripple out and have all kinds of implications elsewhere. Now, what these two have in common is that they both depend on the imagination, because in fact, we can't know what's going on in the head of an other. We can't know where all the ripples are going to be. Ethical thinking involves the imagination. And so I understood that what I wanted to do was help nurture the moral imagination and find a way to do that with texts. And that we know something about. Let me give you an example. Here's a text that you might be familiar with because rabbis love to trot it out around the high holidays. It's a very powerful teaching about what I need to do if I've hurt someone in order to be reconciled with that person, with the world around me, with God. Okay, and we can apply it We can take a case. You've done this to so-and-so. What do you need to do? Who do you need to apologize to? But what else can we do with that? How else can we see that? Well, first, you realize that what it's talking about is me, my needs. But I'm not the only person there. What about the person I've hurt? What do they need? Do they need me to ask them for the favor of forgiveness? Maybe they need me to do some work for them. Maybe they need me to listen to how I've hurt them. Maybe they need me to leave them alone. Got to think about that. Maybe there are other people involved. I'm a teacher, and that means that sometimes the people I deal with, and so sometimes the people I hurt, are students in the presence of other students. So I've messed up. How does that affect other people? What am I going to need to do to reconcile them with me or with other teachers? And come to think of it, how does this whole business of repentance and atonement work in the community at large? What do you mean by that? Well, what difference does it make if I seek forgiveness, if I seek a way of dealing with my guilt feelings by atoning, or by going to a psychiatrist and seeking therapy? Does it make a difference if there's a system where I negotiate the wrongs I did privately, or in a court, or in a duel on the field of honor? We settle it that way. Or maybe just to look upward or inward and ask for God's loving, generous, gracious forgiveness and not deal with the other at all. Okay, what have we done? By engaging our imagination, we've begun to explore a much broader group of people, a much wider set of interactions than the text originally presents us with. And in doing that, we've taken what might otherwise have been a strictly intellectual activity and turned it into a moral exercise. And here's the exciting thing. The Talmud is a uniquely powerful arena for that kind of exercise. Not only does it present us with a whole range of characters and interactions, but its very structure multiplies interactions, inviting us to look at them and explore them. Here's what I mean. Sometimes the Talmudic text will have a speaker giving a teaching directly to the reader. And so we're invited to a one-on-one relationship with that speaker. And we can then explore that relationship. In other times, when we look at a text, what we're seeing is a conversation or an argument or some other kind of interaction, a story, an event going on. And we can look at how the different characters interact with one another. And finally, we want to remember that the Talmud is an edited text. And what the editor did was to take a whole host of traditions, teachings, stories, arguments, discussions, and put them juxtaposed one with the other. And so not only can we examine the relationships between and among characters, we can examine the relationships between and among texts, as well as the relationship between the redactor and those traditions. How do we go about doing this work? There are three principles. The first is to pay attention to the quality of the interactions, as well as the internal lives, the interior world, the experiences and needs of the various people involved. The second is to look for the missing characters, the hidden interactions, the unvoiced voices, and attend to them as well. The third is to imagine alternatives, alternative scenario, alternative details, alternative laws, and to hold those alternatives up so we can compare them with what we've got. And in doing that, get a much better sense of what's really at stake. This approach can make the text both compelling and accessible, regardless of the level of technical expertise or even faith commitment. Further, by shifting our attention from thinking about the ethical content to thinking ethically, we begin to develop our own moral imagination. And the more we do that, the more we attend to those details, to those inner lives, we begin to cultivate that open, nuanced, generous view that can help turn us into more powerful, more interesting, more creative moral agents, the kind that the world needs. That's a big task. Can begin with this little step. Go and read, go and imagine. Thank you.
I really thrived in a traditional classroom with a teacher who lectured frontally. But at the same time, I realized, and this was the 1980s, that not everyone was having the same classroom experience that I was. After all, the 1980s was when Ferris Bueller's Day Off came out, and it's great to be able to reference that movie here in Chicago. And of course, that movie immortalized classroom boredom for everyone. Anyone? Anyone?